This episode features part 1 of a discussion on the mechanics and feel of new helicopters, sling loading, and firing from vehicles, all part of the latest DLC for Arma 3. I'm here with Lucky and John Bonds, here to discuss Helicopters DLC for Arma 3. It's released on November 4th, and the first question I'd like to throw out is discussion of the main differences between each of these heavy lift helos. You have the CH-67 Huron, the Mi-290 Taru, and the smaller version, not a heavy lift, the M900. And John, you're bringing a lot of flight experience to the table here. I wanted to get your take on the first two choppers, which are heavy lift, and kind of the main pros and cons, what we're going to see.
So yeah, the CH-67 is the future version of the Chinook, and to most everyone's mind, and it brings to the table the ability to have an armed transport with two side minigun gunners and lots of cargo capacity, and it brings the transport role, large transport chopper role, to the NATO forces. And then the Taru brings the large transport role to the OPFOR, except it's different in the fact that the Taru by default doesn't have cargo for large group of soldiers. They're modules, so the whole role of the Taru is to pick up modules and transport them and be a lot more modular than something like the Huron, which would just be mostly troop transport and support.
Okay, now do both of those have offensive capabilities as well?
Well, I would say that the Huron does have offensive in the miniguns, but the Taru I'm not too sure about. The Taru, if you're carrying there's a bench transport, which is an open air transport, which can hold, I don't know the exact number, but you can fire from the cargo and that module. So you could be offensive, but nowhere near as accurate as something like a minigun on the Huron.
I'm in a window gunner position in the Huron now, and there's no minigun, but I can point my rifle out the window.
That's the green variant, I think. There's two variants. There's a black variant and the green variant. The green variant would let you shoot from the side, and the black, I think, has miniguns.
It's the other way around, actually, I guess, because I'm looking at a black one. Yeah, okay, that's good to know.
So that's firing from vehicles, allowing you to point your primary weapon out in the main window, even though it's not a weaponized version of the chopper.
Right, there's no static mounted weapon pointing out the window in the black version of the CH-67, but if I'm carrying an M240 or something, I can be pointing that out and be, it's not a 50 cal MG, but it's pretty effective.
That's a good take on the offensive capabilities. For the Taru, with its transport ability for a bunch of infantry who can now utilize the firing from vehicles, which we'll cover in a little bit, that's primary weapons. Is that including things like rocket launchers?
No, rocket launchers are not allowed. With good
for
purpose.
The best.
Yeah.
All right. Let's briefly cover the M900 little bird. I hate to call it that, but it's certainly small. It's fast. What's your take on it, John, as far as just from a technical, speed, mechanical standpoint?
Well, the M900 is going to be close to something like the MH9 Hummingbird. It's basically the civilian variant. In the real life, I believe it'd be the closest you could probably compare it to would be in the MD500. The MD500 is in take-on helicopters, and from what I've seen, the M900 is pretty much the same model as the MD500 from take-on helicopters, and I don't know if the flight model is exactly the same as take-on, but I believe it's pretty close. From my comparison of the MH9 to the M900 in the standard flight model, the M900 feels a little more clunky with its turning speeds, but they're going to be pretty close.
Anything to add to that, Lucky?
No, it clearly, the M900 gives you a civilian version, which is the first civilian helo in Arma 3. Other than that, I'm less of a helo expert than John is. So to me, it feels pretty much like the MH9 in terms of handling. It lacks the sideboards, so it has pilot, co-pilot, and 2 passengers only. It's limited that way.
And as far as being weaponized, any variants on that route?
No, it's going to be totally no weapons because you can't even shoot from the sideboards like you can with the MH9.
It does bring up another point, as far as the Arma verse in general, is previously for something like a life game mode, I believe that you could buy an MH9, but now they could change that into the M900, a less militarized variant.
Yeah, I remember during the stream, Jay Crow talked about that these helicopters, these three, were chosen because they can do new things that previous helicopters couldn't, including being capable of sling loading much heavier loads with at least the two heavy lift choppers, and at the same style, they can carry many more passengers than previously happened. So I think they're all three great additions to the new DLC coming out. And on that note, what are the sort of players who are going to be interested in buying this DLC? Because you have the sling loading and the advanced flight model both existing outside of the buying the DLC, which is coming at a price of about $16. Lucky, what's your take?
Actually, before I answer that question, I want to have a minor quibble with that quote, which, saying that these new helicopters can carry many more passengers. Well, they can carry 16 passengers max, whereas you could get, 12 in a UH-80? So that's not that many compared to like a mod like the SOAR CH-47 Chinook variant, where you can have 24 passengers. Minor detail, but it's there. Can you repeat the question, Felix?
Sure. Kind of thinking about the DLC as a whole, what sort of audience is this geared towards? Because sling loading and advanced flight model still exist outside of this. I know I spoke with John earlier that purchasing the DLC, which you're getting a lot just in this update, 1.34 version, so you're kind of paying for a little bit more of the development work, including the sling loading stuff, the firing from vehicles, and the DLC pretty much gives you the ability to pilot the two new choppers, or the three, I guess. You can still be a passenger in those choppers without buying the DLC. So I didn't know your take on the audience, and if this might be some DLC player might pass up if they're not into the simulation of flight.
Okay. Yeah, I have read some stuff on forums, places, various, from Bohemia forums to Steam, etc. And some people were complaining. They're like, "Oh, they're just out for squeeze our money, and why this should have been included in the beginning." And I think that's just ridiculous. That $16 US is not a lot for the continued development. To answer directly your question, who's gonna want this? Who's gonna want to pay the 16? I would say anybody who really wants to support Bohemia and their ongoing work, for one. Two, certainly people who are more into flying helicopters, players who are into it, and people who just want the whole military, Arma mil sim experience, I think will want to pay that $16 too.
And the bundle is definitely a steal, I would say. About $25. You get the upcoming Marksman DLC as well. And I would agree with you. You're supporting a great developer who is going to deliver a lot. I know the firing from vehicles is something that they've wanted to deliver a long time. And that, paired with the sling loading, which we can talk about right now, are two things I think they executed on very smoothly. When it comes to sling loading, the feel, the weightedness of objects below your chopper just feels correct. And with the non-static rope, it just gets more... it gets that visual appeal, I guess, that can make it you feel more in the element if you're a logistic chopper pilot sort of thing. John, what's been your experience with sling loading?
Yeah, so my experience is it's a welcome addition. There's sling loading has been previously possible through the support of modding, but from a mod perspective, it's a lot harder to do something like a dynamic rope, and to do it through scripting and whatever would be a major pain. The way they've implemented it feels very, very well polished, and is a welcome addition because previously you couldn't do it without scripting or mods, and now we have a new aspect to co-op and PvP servers that wasn't previously available without community additions.
Yeah, as far as mission making, Lucky, when it comes to having the logistical ability to have supplies moved around more quickly, these choppers can obviously carry a lot more, you know, gear or troops. What does that do for the sort of objectives and ideas that you can build into a mission?
Well, if you didn't have mods to use previously, this is going to add a lot of potential for people who want to do more than just run and shoot. A lot of people really do want to do things like fly transport or fly logistics cargo. That came as a surprise to me when I joined taw.net and started making missions for them. And I remember one of the guys said, well, I'd be happy just flying around transporting people. I don't care if I have to wait. And I thought, really? You know, you want to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours, you know, just where half of it you might not even be doing anything except waiting? And he was like, yep, absolutely. And he was right. A lot of people really enjoy that. And I think with a franchise like Arma, you have room to have the breadth of not only to a particular person who wants to do something like fly logistics, but other people who, like, one time they want to fly logistics, another time they want to be a sniper, another time they want to be a door kicker, you know, whatever they're in the mood for. So the universe of Arma just got a little broader for more people.
In addition to sling loading and firing from vehicles being separate, we have an advanced flight model, which is optional, and I love that fact. I think, you mentioned players who are happy to sort of lend their hand on the battlefield by doing, stepping up when needed to transport troops, to bring supplies to that squad that needs it, even if that's not their main goal in the mission. And I think the advanced flight model allows players who want that optional immersion to happen. They can turn that on. And John, I kind of wanted to get your take on some of the helicopter effects brought in on this update and sort of what that means to you flying as a pilot, and how it kind of gives you advantages based on how the previous flight worked.
Yeah, so the thing that AFM allowed was Bohemia to actually take another look at the flight model in general for both advanced and standard. The things that were brought in for both models was very welcome, and they enhanced the damage model in such that the ability to use wheels for wheel landings and skid landings, I believe, applies to both flight models. That being said, the advanced flight model, I believe, is the only one that supports, I'm not completely sure on this, but I think it's the one that supports the wheel brake better than standard. As far as the actual physics itself, it's just another sim factor. Those who want another challenge with the different dynamics of wind and stress of the chopper, RPM management, power management, all those different factors trim into another challenge. It adds that aspect for them. The only thing that I do note for the advanced flight model is the way that it's currently implemented. I personally don't see very many people trying out the advanced flight model with keyboard and mouse and being too successful with it, and being able to pull off the same maneuvers as was possible in the standard. I feel like you have to invest money into a flight stick or throttle in order to get the same experience in AFM as standard.
Okay, so all those effects that you can kind of visually see and feel work, but having a joystick and other peripherals that sort of help you take full advantage of that advanced flight model is sort of necessary, you think?
Yeah, I really think flight designed hardware is something that could be necessary for a lot of people. Unless you have extensive experience with keyboard and mouse and managing collective with that, I feel like it'd be a lot harder to try to learn off the advanced.
Okay, I know they worked with sounds. I think I was really impressed with the wind coming through the cockpit. I know with semi-open helicopters, that's something they sort of increased, so you get a little bit more of a feeling like you're immersed in the cockpit, really flying, depending on how, the creaking when you were, getting a lot of G-forces on turns. I know they also kind of bring in this, updated UI, including gauges. And how has that worked for you when you've performed with the new advanced flight model?
The gauges are a welcome addition, considering the gauge modeling in each individual chopper is kind of lackluster when you compare it to something like DCS A10 or DCS Huey or Black Shark. So previously they weren't as important, except for the minor thing like the horizon ball or whatever it's supposed to be called. With the gauges, they're very useful with the advanced flight model, because you've got to be paying a lot more closer attention to your RPM and your collective and your different factors, because those will kill you if you're not paying attention. That being said, I feel like they probably could have improved the 3D gauges in the 3D world versus just implementing 2D as a quick fix.
Okay, great points. Let's move to now digging into the firing from vehicles, which is featured, and we already mentioned it being executed pretty smoothly. Lucky, earlier you talked about how this opened up the different options you had with mission making. I mean, we talked about the Taru having an offensive capability with people shooting from the special purpose transport pod now, so that's pretty awesome. You're talking about major improvements to being an infantry soldier traveling in a helicopter and be able to do stuff like rooftop landings, right?
Yeah, it just makes it a little cleaner. Everybody, well, probably most people in the milsim community are familiar with the movie Black Hawk Down and seeing soldiers riding into battle on the sideboards of the Little Birds. It, just fires the imagination. And immediately as a mission maker, I started crafting my first mission since the DLC came out using Little Birds and or Hummingbirds, whatever, and having troops, players transported in on the sideboards and being able to shoot at infantry on the ground. And immediately in my tests, I found just how vulnerable you are on the side of that chopper, which it reminds me a lot as something that any veteran Arma player knows, is that it seems like a great idea to climb up on that tower and snipe down on people, but as Arma players know, you just become this huge bullet magnet. And that's kind of true from the sideboards of the Little Bird, that you're very vulnerable. And we know how vulnerable the Little Bird itself and the pilot is already.
Right.
But it's still, once we kind of get used to that, and I, to go into a little more detail than you might want, if you have ground forces with LMGs or heavier, then they are much more deadly towards the soldiers on the sideboards. If they only have, 6.5 mil or smaller, or I don't know, even 7.62, they're less of a threat, it turns out. And I'm talking particularly about AI units. I haven't done a lot of player testing that way, player versus player.
As a person who makes missions, I know with some storylines behind it, have you gotten into using the different in-game content that they added as part of 1.34, including a desktop PC? I know there's a bunch of sports balls and other content in there. How does that work for you with this update, and do you kind of appreciate that attention?
I mean, it depends on, who you're making the mission for, of course, and I'm thinking less about preferences and more about the scale, the scope of the mission. If you've got a lot of players and you're pushing the netcode performance of the game, which I'm often doing, you don't want to put extraneous objects that don't really add a lot in. If you are making a mission for a smaller scale, a squad or 20 people, then you can add a little more color and texture by putting some of those objects in. But I will say that whenever you can add something that's kind of military intelligence stuff, like the laptop or that kind of thing, that is probably going to be useful for a lot of the classic military missions.
All right, I'd like to thank Lucky and John Bonds for joining me talking about Helicopters DLC for Arma 3. Thanks for listening to GETactics Radio.